Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for today's information session, Retail Licensing in California and More, Unlocking Cannabis. Ask Us Anything is kind of the topic of and feeling of today's session. So we're going to start with a bit of a roundtable introduction of each person. Jenna, why don't we start with you, and you can give our audience a bit of an overview of your skills and your presence in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marie. I just want to first apologize. I'm having a little bit of technical issues with my camera, so I'm on a blank screen this morning. But for everyone, I am Jenna. I work with cannabis license experts as a licensing and regulatory specialist. So essentially, I work with clients to help them navigate through the licensing process with their applications to licensure, and then help them beyond that once they get their license in terms of as a resource for what they can and can't do, and just any general questions to make sure that they stay compliant. So I've been in this industry since California went recreational about 5 years ago now. And so I've been doing ever since.
Excellent. And going around the circle on my screen, we have Anthony. It's nice to see you in another one of our sessions.
Yes.
If you'd like to give everyone a bit of an overview of your experience, extensive experience.
Yeah, so I am a licensed electrical engineer by trade. Out of college, I worked in government defense. So I worked in missile and radar systems, did some test work for Navy systems. And once I got my PE license, which is my professional engineering license, it was based in construction. And so I took a pay cut, jumped out of that industry and got into construction. And my first project was at a big federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. And that's where I really learned construction, bugging electricians. And while commuting, I Googled how do you start a business while riding the train, and just figured out, hey, if I can do missile and radar systems, I can do design for buildings. And that's kind of where Winston Engineering came from. And so over time, doing residential and commercial buildings, adding more team members to the company. And then in 2017, when it became legal in California on the recreational side, that's when I got into cannabis. And my first client was someone who did a tomato grow. And then I eventually found out what it was, having to inquire about, what it is that we need to do for the electrical loads and the HVAC loads as well. I found out, and it just kind of snowballed from there. We pretty much we do HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and also civil engineering for cannabis facilities. So essentially, if it's in a building, we can provide those engineering construction permit plans. We've done numerous indoor cultivation, extraction, manufacturing, retail, distribution across the US, with our largest being, I believe, in Oklahoma, a little over 100,000 square feet facility. They actually took an old Kmart and converted it into a indoor cultivation facility. So yeah, we just really been cranking, and it's been really, really busy. But yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's nice to know someone else who has a bit of a military defense background who's moved into cannabis. That's me too. And Sean Yoder, if you'd like to give us a little bit of an overview of what you bring to the industry yourself.
Absolutely. My name is Sean Yoder. I'm the co-founder of Aldertine Cannabis CFOs. I am a California native, and I'm from far northern California. So I grew up in the legacy industry. I've actually been around cannabis for about the last 35 years. I've been in accounting for 30, so that's my actual trade. And then about 3 years ago, I decided that I was going to bring the two together and provide accounting to the cannabis industry from a legacy perspective. And California is a very, very challenging market. I enjoy all of the challenges of this market, and I love to work with California operators more than any other state. So I'm very, very pleased to be here, and thanks for having me.
Excellent. So let's get into advice from each of you while we wait for some questions coming in. Let's go in reverse. Sean, would you like to give us some insights into what you're experiencing and what you're seeing in the industry and what you think people need to be aware of?
The things for retail that I think are the most important things to think about is your entity structure. That's one of the most important things for any business, but especially for cannabis. You really have to think about your entity structure and what's going to be best for you. And that each entity structure comes with its own set of challenges. The other thing is that 280E is a big deal in this industry in terms of accounting. It makes it very difficult to be profitable. So you have to accounting is very complex for this industry, especially for retail, because you're very restricted in terms of what you can claim in terms of cost of goods sold. So that's been my, what I've seen in California is that there are some serious challenges with 280E.
Okay, and Anthony?
Yeah, so you might see me looking up. I have my presentation that I normally give, but so I can kind of stay on track. But typically, when you're looking for a facility, mainly for cultivation, it's extremely important that you get in contact with the municipality, local city, whoever it is, before you pull the trigger on getting into a lease. Quite often, and maybe I think it's happening a little less, but it's still happening where people just make assumptions and come to find out that the building that they're leasing may be too close to, I don't know, a school or whatever the case may be, or it's zoned incorrectly. So make sure you fully understand the zoning requirements before you get into a facility. That's even if you're doing manufacturing or retail, anything related to cannabis. Make sure that the zoning is correct. um, Also, make sure that you're getting with a solid real estate agent that has experience not only in commercial buildings but also in cannabis, because then they're able to help you avoid some of those same pitfalls that maybe a traditional um, commercial real estate agent will might miss, right? So don't go get a relative that you know who just happens to have a real estate license. Get somebody who knows what they're doing in the space. And there are quite a few people out there. Um, Understand your parking requirements. So let's say you found an amazing place that's zoned properly, a great building. Um, it may have some parking, but that's going to change once you start getting into design of your building and how many employees that you may have. So don't plan for the employees that you have now. Plan for the employees that you will have in the future. I've been on projects where we're deep into design and now we have to take up valuable space inside to park trucks or vans or things like that. So make sure that you fully understand that. Also understand if you're going to do a prefab, maybe an extraction booth. So you might need space inside your building. Well, if you don't have the space, are you able to put it outside? And do you have the appropriate setbacks in order to place that unit outside? So pay attention to that. Also, pay attention to your canopy versus support spaces. And when I say support spaces, that's your shower room, right? So when people come in and make sure that they don't contaminate the crop, break rooms, hallways, janitorial closets, conference rooms, essentially everything that supports your grow space. So if you get let's say you get a license for 10,000 square foot of grow, that doesn't mean you go out and get a 10,000 square foot building, right? There are a couple rules of thumb. Typically, people say 60% of it is cultivation canopy and 40% is your support spaces. And, that can go up and down depending um, on whatever it is, whatever your needs are. And then once you start, getting into the design, we as engineers, when we first started, we had some learning to do, right? We would get a floor plan and we'd immediately start jumping into doing calculations, right? Without having conversations with the master grower. And of course, everybody calls themselves a master grower nowadays, but whoever that person is that's responsible for the cultivation side of the business, have a conversation with make sure your design professionals have a conversation with them to determine the appropriate tonnage that they're used to having or that they want. Also, pay attention to your lights. So, California is on the verge of including grow lights in Title 24. Now, Title 24 is the state's um, uh, their energy efficiency code, which is very stringent. It's probably the toughest I've seen in the entire United States. And when that happens, they're going to dictate the wattage per square foot that's in your cultivation space. I believe there are a couple states that are dictating it, but once California adds that to their to grow lights, it's really going to change the game. And people, if you're using metal halide and things like that, you're almost going to be forced to switch over to LED. So I suggest you start researching that stuff now. And then lastly, just power requirements. You need to fully understand that um, cultivation consumes a lot of power. Get with an engineer up front to run some initial load calculations to make sure that you're not getting into a building that won't fit your needs. And it's okay to move into a building that's not ready now, but understand that if you're especially dealing with companies like Southern California Edison or PG&E or whoever it is, it could take up to a year and a half, 2 years for them to do the appropriate power upgrades. So yeah, that's it. Hope I didn't go too long. Oh, you're muted, Mary.
Sorry, just didn't want to cough all over your talk. But I was going to say it's great the information that you provide people and just mm, looking at what they need to consider before getting neck deep in the woods of their project. We always see a lot of that happening and then having to backtrack. So thank you for your input. And I do have one quick question for you before moving on to Jenna. From Austin, what are some of the red flags that you look for when it comes to an indoor cultivation facility that you didn't just mention in the last few minutes?
Red flags. Sometimes we'll consult early on in the beginning of a project when you're just looking for buildings. I pay attention to the age of the building because we've done projects like I'll give you an example. There was a project we did in Skid Row, and those buildings were particularly old. I think one of them was built in the 1950s or 40s, whatever it was. It was very old. And the first thing I did when I walked in was look at the roof structure. And then I asked the owners, where are you guys going to put your condensing units for your HVAC? And everyone looked around and was like, I don't know. So we started looking around and they were suggesting putting in the front. And I'm like, there are a lot of homeless around. That could be problematic. And so w- we had to design a very expensive indoor room with the condensing units that exhausted all the air out of the ceiling. That project became too expensive and they never built it. So pay attention to your roof structure and where you're going to put your condensing units, whether that's on the roof. And if you're going to put it on the roof, make sure that you get a structural engineer involved and understand also that if it's not strong enough, you're going to have to do a seismic retrofit. And in California, that can become very expensive. And if you're going to put the condensing units on the side of your building, again, make sure that you have the appropriate setbacks from the property line to put your units and make sure that you're able to secure them, right? Because sometimes they can be vandalized and things like that, especially with copper piping for the refrigerant lines or something like that gets ripped out. Then you're dealing with a whole another issue. Also, pay attention to your fire sprinkler needs, especially if it's an older building, it may not be sprinkled and the city or county or whatever the local jurisdiction may require it to then be upgraded. And you can't just tap on to the existing water lines. You have to bring in a whole new service specific for the fire sprinkler system.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I am going to circle back with more questions for you as they come in, I am sure. Um, Jenna, what information do you think is most pertinent for today's viewers to be aware of when they are looking at their operations in California?
Yeah, so in California, we have a dual licensing system. So you have to get a local license and a state license before you can begin operating. From a regulatory perspective, the state had a provisional license program to allow you to begin operating under a provisional license while you fulfill the annual license requirements, which are quite extensive in California. Mainly requiring that you have to comply with our Environmental Quality Act, and going through our Fish and Wildlife Department and Water Board and sometimes, and depending on where you're at, especially for cultivation, these can require environmental surveys and create a delay, a significant delay in terms of being able to fulfill those requirements. The provisional license program has ended as of this year, with the exception of some equity businesses that qualify that will have an extension until next year to apply for those licenses. So essentially what that means is the delay, everyone has to wait until they can fulfill their annual license requirements and fulfilling those Environmental Quality Act requirements as well, which can delay the processing of your application to licensure and delay your operation. So you're sitting on a building or a lease for a more extended period of time without being able to operate. So it's a challenge, and it's gonna, I think we'll start seeing more the consequences of that challenge in the future. But on the flip side of that, I do see license transactions, M&A going on. So if California is a market that you really want to get into, I'd say that the quickest path to licensure is looking for a license to buy. And going along with that, you really want to make sure that you do your research, look into the company, look into the corporations, their financials. You really want to do an extensive look into the business itself, because you're buying the business. You're not really buying the license. You're buying the corporation or the entity that holds it. So you really want to do a thorough check on that. And as part of that, consider working with a broker, a licensed broker who has experience in doing these transactions, so they can help navigate through that process. And then working, of course, with a consultant or someone who can help with the license transfer and changing ownership and whatnot. So I'd say that's the biggest kind of challenge right now, is this provisional license program that's ended. And to consider purchasing a license if you want to get started and get up and running within a few short months. You can, I'd say.
Okay. Now, Sean, when you're dealing with your customer base or your clients that you are working with, what do you find is the most commonly overlooked aspect of the process?
The most common issue I run into is inventory. Inventory is a big thing. You can't really run a cannabis business, whether you're a cultivator or a dispensary, without inventory. But that isn't necessarily a sort of a lingua franca for most folks doing this. Farmers are pretty decent about cost accounting, but getting them to do regular monthly cycle counts and explaining to them that that's the only way that they're going to get any sort of tax savings in this industry it's an uphill battle to try to educate people that you really need to be on top of your inventory at all times. So that's one of the biggest challenges that I run into in serving clients in California is that they're struggling just to be profitable for the most part. And so this idea of like having to hire an inventory manager or, pay our firm, a considerable amount of money to handle that stuff for them is sometimes there's some sticker shock involved with that. So I just, but the IRS is looking at you very, very closely. So you want to really, really pay attention to this, because we've seen numerous clients that we've had to come in and save because they were getting killed in audits. And you don't want to tangle with the IRS, because they're really going to come after you in this industry. So that's my warning to everyone. Keep books. Let's circle back to what Jenna was saying in terms of an M&A. If you're trying to buy an existing license, you need to have a financial professional involved in doing the due diligence, because there's a lot of sloppy books. We've done a lot of cleanups for a lot of clients out there, especially a lot of farms. And there are a lot of sloppy books out there. So be careful when you're investing your money into a license and who you're working with. So that's my advice to you if you're out there trying to get a license in California right now. Those are the challenges that we're seeing from the accounting perspective.
Thank you very much. And yes, no farmer wants to do accounting. Most people don't want to do their own accounting. So yes, it's one of those things that we can easily think that we can just look at tomorrow or look at the next day, and then it comes back to bite us. So thank you very much for bringing that to the forefront. Jenna, I have a question from Austin for you. Are there any localities that have an especially excessive or rigorous licensure procedures in the state? Good question.
Yeah, I would say California is my primary market, and in addition to that, I'd say Los Angeles specifically is I have a lot of clients that I've worked with there. The challenge there is a very slow regulatory process. And there have been a number of people who have held on to property since around 2017, 2018, and have been still unable to kind of begin operating. They're still working out their annual license procedures, and it's a slow process there. So I would say Los Angeles specifically, unless you're looking to go into like the unincorporated areas, which should hopefully be opening up after these November ballots that went through. That's an area to look into. If you're looking to find a license, I would try to stay away from maybe bigger cities for now and see if you can find a smaller municipality that maybe has less saturation of businesses, so you can increase your competitive chances there by not having to compete with a number of other people and located in the Bay Area or in Southern California or whatnot.
Anthony, specific to retail, what are some of the kind of engineering concerns that people need to be aware of? I haven't had the joy of coming into a California shop at this point. Do they have vaulting requirements? What are the concerns that the reviewers and the applicants are sometimes overlooking when they're going through the process when it comes to a dispensaries particular?
So with dispensaries, at least on the engineering side, it's fairly straightforward. The most stringent things that we have to worry about as it pertains to HVAC, electrical, and plumbing is making sure smells don't get out the building. So making sure you have the appropriate air filtration so that people walking up don't smell cannabis, which I don't know, it's not a big deal to me, um, but in terms of that's more of an architectural question. So typically, whatever building you want to have, you need to start with an architect first, because the architect will then walk with you, meet with the city officials, et cetera, to figure out your specific, especially security requirements. Do you need what type of controlled access that you need, things like that. From a civil engineering perspective, I've had clients who had a retail shop, and because the use of the building changed, they were now responsible for upgrading the sidewalk, right? Certain things that you wouldn't think have anything to do with you, but because you're moving into that building, the city is going to make you repair that, or you may have to do some upgrades for ADA access, which is definitely needed. So you really have to pay attention to that, especially for retail, and that includes your restrooms as well, right? So making sure that it's wheelchair accessible, so someone can get in there and turn around and fully turn around and all that stuff. And architects have radiuses and stuff that they use for calculations to determine the size. So
Excellent. So overall, it just sounds like make sure you're talking to the right people for the right questions that come up as you're going through this process. Now I have a
exactly.
question. Excellent. Now I have a question from Benjamin, and this could be Sean or Jenna, or if you both want to give us a little bit of an input onto this question. How does the new LA County tax passed compare to existing municipalities?
I'll let Jenna speak to that first, since she's in Southern California and I'm in Northern California. But I do have some thoughts on it as well. But I want Jenna to jump into this first.
Perfect.
Yeah, so Los Angeles County, they did pass the tax measure for the unincorporated areas in the county, 6% of gross receipts that I see for retail. I'd say it's a pretty similar percentage-wise across the state. I've seen, around the 6 to 7 mark. and it can go up even higher in some areas, but I'd say that's for retail, that's a similar percentage-wise based off of the gross receipts. I think Sean probably has a little bit more information on specific taxes, if you might have more input on it than myself.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is it really is consistent across the state. Taxing can be really confusing here. At least they finally lifted the cultivation tax here, but the change of the excise tax and who's paying it and the cadence it's being paid in is very challenging. I live in the far northern part of the state where the infrastructure is really degraded. So a lot of politicians here are very eager and greedy, and so we're getting licenses here where I live, but they are going to charge much higher than the 6% than that because they think they can fix all the roads and solve all the social problems off of cannabis. So it's really challenging. Like Jenna was saying, it's sometimes it's easier to get a license in one of these newer places out here in the country, out here with us country folk. But you're going to run into tax issues with greedy politicians. Just to give you a heads up, in terms of there are always challenges in this, especially in California because it's such a large state. But in terms of the taxing overall, I would say that LA County is very consistent with what we're seeing across the state.
Excellent. And thank you again for that question, Benjamin. Now we've got another question for you, Sean, from Austin, who's very involved today. Specifically with retail, what are a few of the largest costs that you see most often?
That is going to really come down to, that there's the facility costs of, keeping the lights on and the lease of the building. Leases are generally very expensive, but what we see mostly in terms of cost is going to be your product itself, and then also the labor. Your bud tenders, your inventory manager, your floor manager. Those are your biggest costs in terms of the retail location is going to be your labor and to sell to sell your cannabis and your cannabis itself.
Okay. Now I'm going to circle back to Benjamin's question about taxation in LA. He just had a bit of a follow-up. So if it's similar, then does that mean not much of an improvement with the burdens caused on existing operations? It's more of an opinion. We'll let Sean run with it, and then we'll get Jenna's input on that one as well.
I would agree with what Benjamin is saying. There's generally in California, what we're seeing is that there's with regards to taxation, there's never really an improvement on the burden. It's a way to figure out new ways to tax license holders in sometimes sneaky ways and sometimes very overt ways. But we don't really see a lot of improvement. Even with the removal of the cultivation tax, we're going to see an increase in tax on the excise tax. That's going to kick in automatically, I guess, in 2 or 3 years. So there's never really any sort of tax relief at this point in time. I don't see any tax relief coming until federal legalization and we have more guidance.
Okay, that's fair. Jenna, did you have anything to follow up on Sean's statement?
Yeah, I mean, I would really second that. I mean, as you said, that taxes in California are a huge burden for operators here. I mean, consumers, which funnels down to the consumers as well. I mean, they can be taxed up to 30% sometimes in some jurisdictions, which also, from an industry or regulatory standard perspective, the illicit market, the unregulated market thrives under these taxes. The high taxes here, because consumers will go to where they don't need to pay these higher fees, and so that is creating an issue, of course, because it's kind of a market that's almost double than what the regulated market is. So I don't know what the solution is, and I think we need a lot of restructuring to really tackle the issue.
Canada is currently undergoing a regulatory review, and they're struggling with the same questions on excise taxes and duties, and it's a challenge when you have, yes, like Sean was saying, we've got regulators who think they're going to solve all the problems with the money they're generating from the industry, whereas it's imposing such a burden on the operators that we're kind of losing that traction. So my next question is from Ruben. And I think, Jenna, I'm going to let you handle this first, then we'll take some follow-up questions. But is there any progress on incorporating hemp into system, aka the metric system?
Into the metric system, I'm honestly, I don't know if metric has been updated for hemp, but the Department of Public Health has begun licensing for hemp products into cosmetics and food and beverages. So if that is something that you are interested in doing or currently doing, you now need to comply with the licensing process with the Department of Public Health. Honestly, I don't know if metric is updated yet for that, but it's if it's not now, then it's something that they're working on to be in the near future.
Now from Doria. Oh, sorry, gentlemen, did you have anything, or do you feel Jenna kind of gave a pretty concise answer on that one? Okay, so let's take Dora's question. And if I just pronounced your name wrong, I'm terribly sorry. Any advice to help her gracefully and appropriately introduce cannabis contacts to each other? Let's go with Jenna.
Introduce cannabis contacts in what capacity? Can I have a follow-up?
Absolutely. Dora, if you want to add that into the chat there, we'll expand on your question. And in the meantime, Anthony, out of the conversation that's kind of been ongoing so far, have there been any thoughts from kind of your realm of the space that you think should be considered when considering things like taxation, excise, and changes to regulations and locations?
One thing I can think of in terms of taxes is making sure that you tap into the state. And there are consultants out there who do it, but who can get you tax rebates for the specific lights that you use. Also, there are certain energy efficiency rebates that you can get for the HVAC system that you use. You can get state and federal, well, don't quote me on federal, but you can get specific rebates for renewable energy. So if you're able to, solar panels, battery backups, I would highly recommend that you tap into that. It's easier in California to be able to utilize solar than other markets that we work in. Let's say like New York, where there is an abundance of land, especially the closer you get to the city. Or New Jersey, I should say, we're still considering getting our license in New York. But also, I would highly recommend getting battery backup, because your HVAC system is essentially motors, right? And motors create what's called reactants. That reactants is essentially dirty, unusable power that gets put back on the line that can degrade the utilities, their power production. And that's why they charge you more. If you look on your bill, they charge you more for reactants. And so what you can do is you can have a battery backup system that then offsets some of your energy usage during very expensive times in the day. So that's kind of my take on the tax side of things. Just like you said, I don't like dealing with taxes either, which is why I have professionals that deal with it.
Yeah, there's special people who want to take care of our money for us. Thank you. um, all right, so let's see. TJ, we will be providing links to the show, and if you have any specific questions for the speakers today, if you want to send it to the email address that's been scrolling along, we'll make sure that they get forwarded to the appropriate speakers. Now let's take a look at, sorry, I just missed someone's question. So if anybody wants to fill in some dead space while I find it, please feel free to do so. Oh, wait, we've got Dora. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I just wanted to follow up with what Anthony was saying about research and development, those tax credits. They're definitely out there. They're at the federal level. We work with partners that can get you actually quite a bit of money if you're thinking about, like, do it right, and you can get tax credits. It can offset those costs.
I get a question on that myself. So I've always been confused about that. So cannabis is not legal on the federal level. So how are you still able to capture those tax credits on the federal level?
The way the new tax the tax code reforms with the new bill that was signed under the Biden administration, they've opened up a lot more in terms of the tax code that isn't touching under 280E, that will allow you those research and development credits. I don't fully understand tax code. That's not my jam. But I met with we partner with a team that explained it to me. My eyes kind of glazed over, but they were insistent in the tax code, and the tax code's massive, but they were insistent, like, we can get you that money.
Nice. Anytime you can get some money in return, and the cost of these operations is beyond valuable. Okay, so Jenna, I have a bit of an expansion from Doria. So she's saying she's having trouble introducing her familial contacts with professional contacts that she has in the industry. In her exact words, you could say, sometimes I get too nervous to keep it chill. She personally prefers professional settings. So do you have any advice on how to kind of direct those conversations to a more professional setting?
Sure. So, I mean, I'd say just in general, I mean, everyone in the cannabis industry that I've ever come across is very friendly and approachable and outgoing, and and very willing to talk and give advice, and share their knowledge, experience, and their expertise in in their specific field and area, and very focused, of course, on education and educating the industry as a whole for people who may not know a lot about cannabis or its benefits or health benefits as well. I was just reading her question again. I mean, you can always just reach out social media via email. You can always find a way to reach out to specific brands or companies that you're interested in speaking with. I know it's still a little bit of an underground kind of industry, so it can be a little bit hard to find a specific contact, but they're out there. You just reach out, and you can find that more than willing to talk with you, I'd say.
I think personally, like, I struggle with that because I've been very much kind of white collar industry for so long, right? So you kind of become ingrained in the professionalism of what you do. But I think you can just bring who you are and how you are to these meetings, and I don't think it matters where you are when these types of conversations happen. Like, I just went to the Black Cannabis Magazine's conference in New Orleans, and you see every kind of walk of life. You see somebody who's wearing jeans and a t-shirt with with a cap and some sneakers, right? And then you got me with some khakis and a polo like this, right? So it really depends on who you are. That's all it is.
And I found that personally myself as well. As I was recently at Paula Flower's first in Toronto, and I was sitting at a picnic table out back and talked to a lady for 45 minutes before finding out she was the CEO of one of Canada's largest cannabis entities, which was pretty awesome because at the end, we're just on a first name basis, and by the end of it, you're like, okay, all right. I hope you were impressed with our little session we just had here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it an industry that is much easier to break that ice and find common ground in than a lot of the other industries I've worked in. And I do hope that everybody finds the same. Cannabis people are good people. Now, in a bit of a follow-up to Doria, we had a question from, and I'm sorry, I've scrolled down, so I've missed your name, but they were asking, what suggestions do you have to combat black and gray markets that may still be existing in and around your operations?
I would say to combat, the unregulated market is, as a consumer, to make sure that you're, for one, buying from a licensed business. Licensed businesses by law have to post their license number if you're buying from a website, for example, so you can see that they have their license number on there, and that that they are licensed by the state of California to operate. That's a huge thing that consumers can do in terms of combating that unregulated market.
Excellent. And Doria also had a question, and I'm going to pose this to both of you because I do know that our team will be there. But is anyone going to MJ BizCon? Anthony, will you be there this year?
I will not be in MJ BizCon. I plan to go next year. Um, I I'm at the point now where we're extremely busy, both cannabis and non-cannabis projects, but our team is growing and is getting to the point where the team, the system, right, is starting to run itself, and that'll allow me to step away a little bit more, and also send other team members to conferences. So next year we'll go for sure, just not this year.
Excellent. And Jenna, I believe you're going to be there this year, yes?
NJ BizCon, I'm not going to be there as well this year, unfortunately, but yeah, planning for another one in the future.
Excellent. Although if anybody does want to meet with our team, we will be there. Andrew and several other members of our US team will be there. So feel free to reach out if you want to make an appointment with any of them. Let's see, does anybody have any last minute questions that we want to pose to the group? As well, Dylan, if you're there, could you let Sean back in? He just put a little note into the group there.
Thanks.
Welcome
Sorry
back,
about that.
Don.
I dropped out there for a second. Living
Not
out
a
here in the
problem.
country.
While you were off there, I just wanted to say, are you or your team going to be at MJ BizCon this year? If anybody
Yes,
is.
I am going to be specifically at MJ BizCon. So if anybody wants to meet up with me, I would more than happy to talk accounting and taxes with you.
Excellent. And again, as I've mentioned, and Dylan in the chat, there will be ways to connect to all the speakers, to connect with all the speakers today, whether it be at MJ or just through the regular channel. Let's see. Does anybody have anything they want to discuss today that I have not touched on, or the questions from our guests have not touched on at this point?
I think I'm good. If anybody ever wants to reach out to us, website is pretty easy, winstoneng.com. Or you can winstoneng.com/cannabis. You're going to reach us on every social media platform, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. We post pretty heavily, so there's always ways to reach out to us.
And I follow you myself, and I find a lot of valuable information through your LinkedIn
Thank
posts.
you.
Thank you. All right. So I think we'll wrap at this point. We're at 42, almost 45 minutes. I'm just going to do another quick check to see if we've had any questions pop in. Not at this point. So two kind of housekeeping ish matters to just mention is, if you've enjoyed today's session, we do have a kind of what to expect in the US 2023 session coming up on December the 5th. If you'd like to join that, you can find more details through LinkedIn, and I believe Dylan is posting a link to that as well in the chat. And as well, if anybody has enjoyed today's chat and wanted to leave a review, in no way are we expecting one, but there is a link that's also posted in our comment section that you can log on to if you so wish. And I would just like to take a moment to just do another quick check to make sure we haven't had any last minute questions come through. Not at this point. So I just want to thank everyone for your time, your valuable information that you are so willingly sharing with our industry and our guests today.